All right, here we go with this part of the episode. This is going to be what is called the vision. Currently, we call it Section 76 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and this is a very, very big deal for Latter-day Saint theology, so let's jump right in. The first copy of this that we get is actually Revelation Book 2, handwriting of Frederick G. Williams, and Joseph Smith actually has his own edition of text in here. We'll get to that in a moment. And just so that you know, this is the very first thing you get in Revelation Book 2. In fact, there are some who believe that they bought a book that was later named Revelation Book 2 in order to record this revelation. So this is the first thing that you get. That's how important this was. They're like, this is a really big deal. Let's go out and buy another big, huge book that we can use to write our revelations down. And that's what starts Revelation Book 2. So it's kind of fun. The corrections to the text that we do get, there's a few, start with Oliver Cowdery, and then Joseph inserts a portion of text, like an actual pretty big chunk of it. And then after that, any correction that is made to like a word change or anything like that is Joseph Smith's hand. Now, if you go back to Revelation Book 1, that doesn't exist. There's not a whole lot of corrections in it. We believe that's because it was done later on. But it's kind of interesting. Oliver Cowdery has a couple of things. Joseph Smith adds an entire small portion there. I would say call it 2 sentences in today's terms. And then after that, some words are changed, and all of that is in the hand of Joseph Smith. So what's really interesting is that Joseph himself was very active in the recording of this first version that we have. We believe that there was maybe previous copies to this, but that they went out and got Revelation Book 2, and this is what we have now. It takes up 10 manuscript pages in Revelation Book 2. This is, to this point, the longest revelation that we've ever received from Joseph Smith. Modern scriptures clock this in at 119 verses, so it's long. Even in today's books, it takes several pages. The biggest addition made by Joseph Smith, by the way, is this, and I'll just read it off to you. It says, "Great shall be their reward, and eternal shall be their glory. And unto them will I reveal all mysteries, yea, all the hidden mysteries of my kingdom from days of old, and for ages to come will I make known unto them the good pleasure of my will concerning all things to come, yea." And then it goes back to Frederick G. Williams' handwriting. So if you'd like to know, that is the big phrase that he put in there. Like I said, call it 2 sentences worth. We will get to some of the corrections that come from content and footnotes section, so I'll leave that for a moment. But after that, it's a couple of word changes here and there. But yeah, that's how it goes down. So that's the original copy. Another copy that we get is in Sidney Gilbert's notebook. It's a very, very clean copy in the handwriting of Sidney Gilbert. And so we believe that this was probably put in shortly after Revelation Book 2. And then after that, we get a copy in Revelation Book 1 chronologically. So this is the handwriting of John Whitmer and has very, very few corrections in Revelation Book 1. This is a very, very clean copy. And I would assume that the printing probably came from this copy, and it incorporates all of the changes that were made in Revelation Book 2. It is found in 2 different versions of the Evening and Morning Star, one in 1832 and another one in 1835. So this was widely published in the church's official periodical of the time, which was called the Evening and Morning Star. It is section 91 in the original Doctrine and Covenants. So it's not section 76, it is section 91 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. There is a copy in the manuscript history, and we'll get to that in a moment. And then, believe it or not, section 76, the vision, Joseph Smith papers, all of that stuff, there are no significant changes between the 1981 and 2013 current section headings of the Doctrine and Covenants. So they had the dates right, they quoted the same things, all that was kept the same. So I guess kudos to those who originally put together all of this back in the day. So, but there are no section changes. I thought there would be a ton, but there's none. So there you go. That's the papers. Now let's get into the circumstances surrounding this. A couple of introductions we get from these original documents. Revelation Book 2 gives this. The vision, a vision of Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, February 16th, 1832, given in Portage County, Hiram Township, state of Ohio, in North America. Interesting. Which they saw concerning the church of the firstborn and concerning the economy of God and his vast creation throughout all eternity. It's a great introduction. And that's a lot more than what you get elsewhere. Gilbert's Notebook just says vision. That's what you get. Revelation Book 1 is the same as Revelation Book 2. They basically copied that over from one place to another. And the dates are the same, February 16th, 1832. Evening and Morning Star periodicals just call it a vision. And the Doctrine and Covenants does the same thing, just called a vision. So from the manuscript history, we get a lot more here. It says, upon my return from Amherst Conference, I resumed the translation of the Scriptures. From sundry revelations which had been received, it was apparent that many important points touching the salvation of man had been taken from the Bible or lost before it was compiled. It appeared self-evident from what truths were left that if God rewarded everyone according to the deeds done in the body, the term heaven, as intended for the saints' eternal home, must include more kingdoms than one. Accordingly, on the 16th of February, 1832, while translating St. John's Gospel, myself and Elder Sidney Rigdon saw the following. And I wanted to point that out because in all the other manuscript editions, it's usually said, received the following or so forth. But in this case, that saw the following is why we call it a vision. And we will get into, there's some recollection accounts of what that means, what they saw, how they experienced that, how they wrote it down. Where were they when this all happened? So we'll get all into that in a minute. So those are all of the contemporary circumstances surrounding this. Very big, heavy on this idea from the vision. Now, just to be really crystal clear, when he's talking about resuming a translation of the Scriptures, the instruction was specifically to the New Testament. So that's why he was doing St. John's Gospel, and we'll actually get to that one in a moment. So now we get into the historical introduction, and so for this, I just wanted to once again thank the editors and everybody who worked on this project from the Joseph Smith papers, because there's a lot here. It's very long for this section. So this is from Documents Volume 2, and I will add that this is the end of Part 2 of Documents Volume 2, so this is a very significant shift, which is acknowledged in those papers. So here we go. It says, on the 16th of February, 1832, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon saw a vision, quote, concerning the economy of God and his vast creation throughout all eternity, unquote. Likely, while in the upstairs bedroom of the John and Elise Johnson home in Hiram, Ohio, this vision came after Joseph Smith returned from the January conference in Amherst, Ohio, and after he resumed his work of revising the New Testament at the Johnson home, with Rigdon working as scribe. So there you go. Now, he mentions here that he is translating specifically from John chapter 5, verse 29. So I will read that to you now. In the King James Version, this is what it says. And shall come forth they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. That is what you get in the King James Version. Now, this is Joseph Smith doing a revision of the Bible. So the question would be, did he make any changes to this verse? And the answer to that is yes, and I will get into that in a moment. And there's a very interesting error, in my opinion, that happens in the 1981 version of the Scriptures that a lot of my generation grew up with that wasn't there. So it's very interesting that there were changes made to this. All right, so continuing in the historical introduction, it says, according to the description of the vision, on 16 February 1832, Joseph Smith and Rigdon reviewed John chapter 5, verse 29, which I just read, wherein Jesus Christ prophesies that the dead will come forth, they that have done good, unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil, unto the resurrection of damnation. They reported that when they pondered this verse, they together beheld a vision of what awaited humankind after death. So, what did they see? Well, the biggest thing of note from this is what we today call the 3 degrees of glory. So, from the historical introduction again, Joseph Smith and Rigdon's description of the vision outlined 3 levels of heavenly glory: celestial, terrestrial, and telestial, and the requirements for entrance into each. According to their report, every person who lived on earth apart from followers of Satan, known as sons of perdition, would spend the afterlife in one of these kingdoms. These concepts differed considerably from views of an afterlife held by most Protestant churches, that the souls of the righteous were received into heaven, while the wicked are cast into hell. Now, what's really interesting about this that I found was that we are not the only ones that felt this way. So this is something that I think is really remarkable about the Joseph Smith papers, is you get this kind of thing. So other people had a concept of other ideas besides just heaven and hell. So historical introduction again. Other thinkers and theologians, however, had conceptions of heaven that were more similar to Joseph Smith and Rigdon's vision. The Universalist Church, with which Joseph Smith's grandfather, Asaph Smith, had affiliated, proclaimed that Christ would temporarily punish sinners, but eventually redeem all people. Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish scientist and mystic, posited in the mid-1700s that heaven consisted of 3 different levels, which he called celestial, spiritual, and natural. Alexander Campbell, Rigdon's former associate in the Disciples of Christ, who also wrote about 3 kingdoms, the kingdom of law, the kingdom of favor, and the kingdom of glory. And this is the Campbellite religion again. Campbell's kingdoms of law and favor, however, could be experienced during mortal life, and only the kingdom of glory was reserved for the afterlife. In describing these 3 kingdoms, Campbell wrote that the first was entered through birth, the second through baptism, and the third through good works. One differed from the next, Campbell declared, quote, as the sun excelled a star, unquote. So there are some very interesting things that were already held. Now, you can see where the differences are, and we'll get to that in a moment. But just the idea that there's these 3 degrees, I think, is very, very interesting. And I know there's some, I think it's Paul or maybe Peter that talks about, being caught up into different degrees. So anyway, but it wasn't just Latter-day Saints that sort of felt that there was more to it than just heaven and hell. So how was this vision received? How did we actually get it? What were the circumstances behind it? And this is where it gets fun. So again, in quoting from the historical introduction, neither Joseph Smith nor Rigdon described in detail how the vision occurred, only that they both saw it at the same time. The shared nature of the vision made it somewhat unusual. Although some experiences of angelic visitations had multiple participants, including the appearance of John the Baptist to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery in May 1829, and the appearance of an angel showing the gold plates to Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris in the summer of 1829, most visions and revelations had been experienced by Joseph Smith alone. Philo Dibble, who claimed to have been with Joseph Smith and Rigdon in the Johnson home when the vision occurred, later recounted that Joseph Smith and Rigdon sat in the upstairs room where they had conducted much of their work on the Bible revision with 12 other men. By turns, either Joseph Smith or Rigdon would ask, "What do I see?" and then relate the scene, after which the other would reply, "I see the same." There is no indication in Dibble's account that anyone was recording the vision as it occurred. Instead, Dibble said that there was not a sound nor motion made by anyone in the room. Dibble recalled that neither Joseph Smith nor Rigdon moved a joint or limb during the time I was there. So basically, what do I see? And then somebody would describe it and they say, I see the same, and then it would go back and forth. That's what happened. And apparently they were at least in the company of 12 other people. So there you go. So how was it recorded then, even after this? So we get from the historical introduction. How, or precisely when, Joseph Smith and Rigdon recorded the experience of seeing the vision is unknown. According to the written account of the vision, Joseph Smith and Rigdon were commanded 4 separate times to record what they were seeing. It may be that they made a record after each command and then proceeded. Alternatively, Joseph Smith and Rigdon may not have recorded anything until after the vision concluded. They were instructed to write their account while they were, quote, yet in the spirit, unquote. And the text in the account indicates that they did so. If Joseph Smith and Rigdon recorded the event after its conclusion, therefore, they apparently did so soon thereafter. The first part of the vision, beginning, "Hear, O ye heavens," and ending, "Yet entered into the heart of man," seems similar in language and style to Joseph Smith's revelations, suggesting that Joseph Smith may have dictated the first part separately from the rest of the account. It is unknown whether Joseph Smith dictated the entire record to Rigdon, Rigdon wrote it himself, or the two worked collaboratively. Whatever the case, both apparently signed the record after its preparation as a testament to its legitimacy. The placement of Rigdon's signature before Joseph Smith's indicates that Rigdon was serving as the scribe for the account and signed after completing it. Moreover, Joseph Smith and Rigdon's vision occurred, as their own account attests, quote, "as we sat doing the work of translation," unquote, in which process Rigdon served as a scribe. Rigdon had also recently transcribed some of Joseph Smith's dictated revelations. So that's how they wrote it down. We really don't know, is the short answer to that. And again, the vision probably was the reason why we have this Revelation Book 2, and it's why it's the first in that record. So again, from this introduction, the earliest extant copy of the account of the vision is in Frederick G. Williams' handwriting, with a few lines penned by Joseph Smith. Williams was doing scribal work for Joseph Smith in July 1832, and possibly as early as February. He and Joseph Smith copied the account of the vision into the new blank book, probably during February or March 1832, making the vision the first item in Revelation Book 2. Indeed, Joseph Smith may have purchased the book for the purpose of entering the account of the vision, giving the vision's emphasis on writing down what was seen. Additional copies of the document quickly circulated. And that, as they say, is that. So those are the circumstances surrounding it from the Joseph Smith papers. There may be other things out there, but that's what we got. That's all that we have officially. So some content and footnotes from this, and then I'll get into the aftermath of what this meant for people. So from Joseph Smith's contribution, again, says, "Great shall be their reward, and eternal shall be their glory. And unto them will I reveal all mysteries, yea, all the hidden mysteries of my kingdom from days of old, and for ages to come will I make known unto them for the good pleasure of my will concerning all things to come, yea." And that's the end of that. So footnote 6 to this, about mysteries. So what does the American Dictionary from the time say? So this is from an 1828 dictionary. It says, "Anything of the character or attributes of God, or in the economy of divine providence, which is not revealed to man, or the idea of something awfully sublime or important, something that excites wonder." So again, when we're talking about mysteries, there's quite a lot, but it usually talks about sort of the nature of God and maybe some of the economy, the things surrounding God and how he works. So there you go. The text gives us also, a little further down, "While we meditated upon these things, the Lord touched the eyes of our understandings, and they were opened. And the glory of the Lord shone round about, and we beheld the glory of the Son on the right hand of the Father, and received of his fullness, and saw the holy angels and they who are sanctified before his throne, worshiping God and the Lamb forever and ever." Footnote 14 for this little statement says, "Philo Dibble later recollected that as he sat in the room with Joseph Smith and Rigdon, he, quote, saw the glory and felt the power, but did not see the vision," unquote. So apparently he was in the room, and apparently he definitely saw something and definitely felt something, but he didn't see the same vision that they saw. So all these people, all these righteous people, angels and whatnot around the throne of God was seen only by Smith and Rigdon, according to them. So the text also states a little further, "They are they who are priests and kings who have received of his fullness and of his glory, and are priests of the Most High after the order of Melchizedek, which was after the order of Enoch, which was after the order of the only begotten Son." Footnote 35 states, "This is apparently in reference to the office of high priest. Ezra Booth, one of those ordained to the high priesthood at a June 1831 conference, and who subsequently left the church, recalled in fall of 1831 that elders had been ordained to the high priesthood or the order of Melchizedek. So just to be crystal clear, those two terms are interchangeable according to this. So precept of the Most High, order of Melchizedek, order of Enoch, Melchizedek priesthood, all of those things apparently are the same thing according to this. So now we get a description of those who will inherit the celestial kingdom. So from the Revelation it says, "These are they who shall come forth in the resurrection of the just. These are they who are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly place, the holiest of all. These are they who are come to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of Enoch, and of the firstborn. These are they whose names are written in heaven, where God in Christ is judge of all." The footnote 44 to this, speaking about the prophecy of Enoch, so this prophecy of Enoch is the first chapter of the book of Moses, states, according to this document, again, what we would call, Moses, not chapter 1, but chapter, I think, 7. Enoch, who is mentioned briefly in Genesis 5, built up a city called Zion that became so righteous that, quote, God received it up unto his own bosom, unquote. The prophecy stated that at Christ's second coming, the city of Enoch would come back from heaven, join with the New Jerusalem, and be received again into God's bosom. And this is part of the second coming theology that we have in Latter-day Saint religion. So now we get to talk about the terrestrial kingdom a little bit. It says, "We saw the terrestrial world, and lo, these are they who are of the terrestrial, whose glory differeth from that of the church of the firstborn, who have received the fullness of the Father, even as that of the moon differeth from the sun of the firmament." Footnote 49 for this text says, Joseph Smith and Rigdon's use of the term terrestrial, which generally is associated with the earth, is similar to the usage in the 1 Corinthians 15:40-42. Walter Scott, one of Rigdon's former associates in the Disciples of Christ, used the term terrestrial to describe the world where Adam and Eve dwelt before partaking of the forbidden fruit. Mark Staker characterizes Scott's view of this terrestrial world as, quote, "an idyllic state where God came to visit his children. It experienced neither death, pain, nor sorrow," unquote. So a little of the tradition of what a terrestrial world may look like, or a terrestrial glory may look like. Sounds rather lovely, actually. Then we get into the telestial glory, and we get from the Revelation, "While we were yet in the Spirit, and again we saw the glory of the telestial, which glory is that of the lesser, even as the glory of the stars differeth from that of the glory of the moon in the firmament." Footnote 53 doesn't give us too much. It says, "Telestial is not found in the 1828 edition of Webster's Dictionary, or in the Bible, or in the Book of Mormon." And I take this as you can interpret it one of two ways. One way is it's just very unique. There's really no reference to anything here. And the second thing is that this may be, if you believe in this sort of thing, that it is truly a revealed new concept and idea that they did not know of before, but telestial glory there, which is compared to the glory of the stars, as you saw. Now, in the Joseph Smith papers, there are lots and lots and lots of footnotes quoting scriptures. In fact, even Habakkuk gets a turn on this one from the Old Testament. But, and I mean, Habakkuk's not a long book, but it's not one that we usually talk about. So anyway, yeah, lots of scriptural references, tons of that going on here. Obviously, it's a translation of the Bible that's going on and all that kind of stuff. So those are the contents and footnotes for this particular section. So what is the aftermath of this? Well, the historical introduction gives us a little further to this. It says, reaction to the contents of the vision varied among individuals in the Hiram community and among church members in other areas. Some, such as Lincoln Haskins, thought it contained, quote, "great and marvelous things." Others struggled to reconcile its concepts of the afterlife with traditional notions of heaven and hell. It also became a target of criticism by outsiders, some of whom regarded it as both pompous and an attempt to embrace and teach universalism. A later Joseph Smith history stated that the vision transcended the knowledge of the afterlife available at the time. declaring that, quote, nothing could be more pleasing to the saint upon the order of the kingdom of the Lord than the light which burst upon the world through the vision, unquote. So, a strange aftermath to this, and then I'll get into how it's used today. So all of this is part of the aftermath of receiving this. There are some who took this very, very well. This was one of those things that was pretty radical for its time. But one thing I just wanted to point out here that I find really interesting, John chapter 5, verse 29. This whole thing started while they were, looking over this and trying to decide what it means and getting revelations for it and all this kind of stuff. So in 1979, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints published a new version for ourselves, of the King James Version of the Bible. And this was a very huge project. I mean, I don't think that can be understated. And in 1979, it was introduced and it was made available. And in this case, what they did is they came up with an entire footnote system for it, which was pretty revolutionary at the time. So the way that they did footnotes was very different. They came up with a whole topical guide. They wrote a Bible dictionary. And at the very end of that included maps and a gazetteer and all that. But you also get, believe it or not, you get the Joseph Smith translation is now included in the footnotes. Now, anything that was too big for footnotes would be put into an appendix called the Joseph Smith Translation Appendix. And so if anything was really a little too long for a footnote, that's where it would go. Now, I looked in my 1981 copy that I had that we used for a very long time, and I looked in the footnotes and I looked in the appendix. This scripture does not exist in either place. The Joseph Smith translation version of the scripture does not exist in either place. And I thought that was very strange. So I looked up, as you may have seen before, I have the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints printed, I think maybe used to print, I don't know if they still do anymore, a side-by-side of the inspired version, as they call it, compared to the King James Version. And inside of that book, we have John 5:29. We don't have it in the 1981 version. Now, in 2013, the edition was changed. And now, if you look in the New Testament, you will now see a footnote for 5:29. And in this case, what Joseph does is he changes basically life to salvation and damnation to the unjust. So the resurrection of the just and the unjust is what it turns into. So anyway, those are the changes that were made. Those two words, pretty significant. They were changes made. And then, as I said before, this vision bursts upon them, and that's what we get from there. So that's the aftermath of it. Now, what's the other aftermath of it? Well, so in modern, I would say gospel teaching is probably the best way to put it. Usually we diagram this. And so in order to sort of respect sort of more official things on this, I used to use dishes on this when I taught this on my mission. But I've chosen to use what's available on the churchofjesuschrist.org. So just in case you don't know, and rather than me going through the entire thing, kind of the main points that we glean from this section, besides a lot of other stuff, I mean, way more than I'm going to get into today, I would just commend you, go read it. It's available to all. The first one we're going to look at is sort of a traditional one. This is from the church's website, and as you can see, what this reveals to us, and this is all part of this section, and some of this is filled out later on in other revelations that are received by Joseph Smith. On the very left here, you're going to see the premortal world, and there's sort of this veil, right? And the idea is that we were spirits in the presence of God before this, as children of Heavenly Father. We did not have physical bodies, while our Heavenly Father did have a physical body. And that a plan was presented to all of us that we could go to earth, receive a body, prove ourselves worthy, and return to live in God's presence again. That is the idea, is that there was a plan premortally. We get a lot of those details from later revelations like the book of Abraham and even some things in the book of Moses, so from the Old Testament translation. And then we pass through this veil where we forget where we were beforehand. We gain a body, we're born, we live on this earth, there's disease and sickness and all sorts of stuff, and we're sort of left here to choose for ourselves whether we're going to follow God or not. At death, our spirits separate from our bodies. The body goes into the ground or maybe cremated or wherever. And you go to what is called the spirit world, where there is a division of paradise and prison. And I think the most popular teaching of this right now, 2025, would be that paradise is a place where people have accepted the gospel. They kind of know what's going on, and they have a sense of what they need to do. And then spirit prison is not necessarily meant to like really harshly punish people, but maybe they don't know what's going on, and they're stuck or damned, as it's said, like they're stopped. They can't move forward. And so the idea is that these two, these are not hard divisions. It's mostly in sort of in the mind of the beholder, if you will. There are some instances where prophets and others have sort of stated that the spirit world is actually on planet Earth. It's not like you go to some other planet or some other planet. You're still here, that the spirits are still around, which I think a lot of religions and a lot of people feel is true, that they can feel their loved ones close to them or whatever. It's not like they're far away in some other place. So I don't know how official that is in the church, but that is something that is taught and has been taught. And that there's this idea that there is a missionary program, to put it very simply, of the people in paradise who are preaching the gospel currently to the people in spirit prison to allow them to sort of be in a better place and to have the opportunity to accept the gospel, especially if they didn't have the opportunity in this life. And so that concept right there, by the way, is the entire reason. And again, this is why this section is so huge. This is the entire reason why we do proxy work for those who have died before us. So if you've ever driven by a temple and wonder what we do things for ourselves in there. We receive what's called the endowment. We're married in the temple. All of this is true. But when that's not going on, and that's in comparison pretty, like, I don't want to say minor. I would say takes a lot less of the time of temple work than the work for the dead. The work for the dead takes up the vast majority of temple work. And it is this idea that these spirits who are in prison, or maybe even in paradise, we can do their ordinances, like being baptized or being married or any of that kind of stuff. We find their names, we do those ordinances, and that is all sort of this effort going on in the spirit world idea. But all of that comes to an end. That experience in the spirit world comes to an end during the resurrection, where the spirit and the body come back together again. The judgment happens at the same time as that, as you can kind of see here. And then based on judgment, and a lot of people have said you're kind of judging yourself. I don't know if we really know that for sure or not. You're assigned to a kingdom of glory. And there's this idea of kingdom hopping, like, can you just become righteous over the eternities and go from telestial to terrestrial to celestial? That's never been taught. I won't really get into that. What I find very interesting about this revelation, and this is, a lot of people like to focus on, like, well, who makes it into the worst kingdom? And there's also this thing called outer darkness down here, which is meant for Satan and his followers, and who gets to go to that kingdom and all this kind of stuff. Section 76 is interesting. It focuses most of its time on the celestial kingdom. Who gets to go? What's it like? It's the presence of God. And then later on, way later on in Joseph Smith's life, he actually receives a revelation that not only shows him that somebody like his brother Alvin can receive the gospel, like I just explained, through proxy work in a temple, but also that there are 3 degrees, there's 3 levels even inside of the celestial kingdom itself. And I've also heard the idea, and I'm just kind of doing this to fill in the history, is that entrance into the celestial kingdom is achieved at a minimum through being baptized into the church, or receiving the gospel, if you will. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. I'm not sure what the middle one is, but the top one, if you want to get to the top, and that is in this revelation, the highest level of glory in the celestial kingdom is attained after being sealed in the temple to a spouse and family. And the idea behind that is not just that you're doing something for yourself, but that God, as our Heavenly Father, is trying to seal all of his family back to himself again, and hence you're in that upper level of the degree of glory where God lives in Jesus Christ. So that is the plan of salvation that we get. Now, there's this other diagram that I saw that was a little bit more complicated. This is an official thing from the church as well. But as you can see, there's this idea of the presence of God being sort of overarching the pre and post mortal life. And that, yeah, you pass through the veil, go to mortality when you die. There's a spirit world where paradise and prison are there. And you can see that they've merged these two together. And I think that is an effort to sort of show that you're not being, carried off to some other plane of existence or something like that. So there's, I don't know, I'm making an assumption there. And then resurrection, final judgment, passes, and then you're flowed through to your other kingdoms. And then, of course, outer darkness is out here on its own. So not to get too much into, sort of the theology of it, I just wanted to kind of explain the things that were unique to the church at the time from this. And there were some that called it kind of preposterous and weird and all that kind of stuff. And I think even modern critics, and I think this is a legitimate thing, by the way, is this idea that, you have to do this thing in our church in order to get up to the thing. I can understand where that pompous thing would come from, or even how the enemy sort of treat it today of the church. But I would say that what this is really about is, and how it's taught in Latter-day Saint theology today, and I think this has sort of changed over the many years, is this idea that we are one large eternal family and that God is using priesthood power to link everyone back together again so that we can all enter into the kingdom of heaven. And also that we're not just tripping, we're not going to trip and stumble and accidentally show up in a lower degree of glory or accidentally show up in God's presence. This is definitely something that we choose, that makes us independent, that apparently we are capable of doing this. And this whole idea that we are children of God, capable of becoming something greater and living in the presence of God, is a major teaching of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Go to any general conference and you're going to hear this idea of what we are meant for greater things, that we are children of God, that we are capable of doing righteous and good things and big things and difficult things and all of that. And so definitely a big message of hope, definitely very positive. And so this is something that is very, very unique to Latter-day Saint theology. And I would argue probably one of the big, sort of spiritual, vast, cosmic ideas that the Church of Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith, and I should say Sidney Rigdon, also gave to the world in this case. So yeah, I believe, I'm trying to think if there's maybe anything else that should be covered here. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every little change and all that kind of stuff. But as you've seen the document, and again, if you're just curious about this, if you've never read section 76 before, please go read it. It's not terribly long, but like I said, 119 verses is not short either. But yeah, it came from a New Testament translation and sort of expanded out the view of things. And we're going to see this vision being referred to later on. There's a couple of very direct references in other revelations that are in the Doctrine and Covenants, including, I believe, even, I would say, both of the official declarations as well are part of that. Now, that's not going to be part of the Joseph Smith papers, but this is definitely something that we go back to quite a lot. So I hope that was interesting. And again, a very interesting contrast to this conference that Oliver Cowdery was in, where they're talking about clearing land and building a school and all this. And at the same time, you're receiving this cosmic view of what life is about, where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. And all of that is always connected. We don't like to separate those. The temporal and the spiritual are inseparable. So a little bit about Latter-day Saint theology, a little bit about what is called the vision. In our next part here, we're going to look at this section here that's been crossed out and was never, ever, ever, ever published. So we're going to fill in that history for you in just a moment. So stick around.